and his gut feeling was right. Europe was shirking its duty. But the ones who are shirking their duties the most are the Canadians.
That's why we got to invade them too, Carl.
And
boots on the ground.
Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Tuesday, June 24th. I'm Andrew Walworth, and joining me are Real Clear Politics co-founder and President Tom Bevan and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. So President Trump is in the Netherlands for the NATO summit, but all eyes are still on the Middle East, where the president of Iran announced this afternoon that the war with Israel is over. The ceasefire got off to a rocky start, and there's still no official word on what the terms of the agreement are, Tom. But Trump had tough words for both countries today before he got on the plane to Europe. Here's just some of what he had to say.
I'm not happy with Israel. You know, when I say, okay, now you have 12 hours, you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on them. So I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either. But I'm really unhappy if Israel's going out this morning because the one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land. I'm not happy about that. You know what? We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the fuck they're doing. Do you understand that?
So, Tom, that must have gotten the attention of people in Tel Aviv and Tehran. It certainly got my attention. What do you make of it?
Carl's shaking his head.
Well, it's a pretty good cell phone. It's a pretty good description of Donald Trump.
Oh, come on, Cannon. Listen, I look, this president is, all presidents use foul language, usually not in public, though. And this is Trump sort of, I think it shows his frustration, and with particularly the Israelis, as he mentioned. I mean, he clearly announced last night that there was a ceasefire, and apparently Israel went right out and violated it. And so, and he also posted on X something that Israel's not going to attack Iran. The planes are turning around. They're going to do like a wave and a drive-by or whatever. Clearly trying to walk that back and basically tell the Israelis, look, this is not going to happen. So we'll see. I mean, it's a work in progress. We'll see if the ceasefire can hold and if this war really does come to an end. If it does, if that is the case, he also said, by the way, on the plane ride over to NATO, he met with the press and said, listen, he was asked about regime change. He said, I don't want regime change. There's too much chaos, and there would be more chaos with regime change. So he seemed very clear that he was perfectly happy to basically have this be the new status quo, right? We struck them. He said they're never going to have a nuclear weapon. They need to come to terms with that. And if that's where this ends up, and there does get to be some peace and stability in the Middle East, it could be a huge win for Trump. We're not quite there yet. In fact, we're quite a ways from that as of right now. But it doesn't look like it's going in the other direction, which is, exploding the Middle East and all of the worst fears that everyone, including Tucker Carlson and everybody else, predicted, certainly have not come to pass, at least not yet.
Carl, you seem upset that the president would use the F-bomb. Is that your real problem?
Carl never uses the F-bomb.
That's right.
He's like a church mouse.
All right, I'm going to tell you guys this. I'm going to tell our audience a story then. Very short. My brother, Dave, who's no longer with us, he passed away on my birthday in 2016, but we were very close. And one year he was teasing me. He called me on New Year's Day. He said, well, so have you made your 67 New Year's resolutions this year? And because I used to make multiple New Year's resolutions and rarely keep them. I said, no, I've got it down to one this year. He says, what is it? I said, I'm going to stop using the word, and I used the word that the president used today. He said, you're going to stop using the F word? I go, yeah. And he paused for a second and he said, hey, you know what? Why don't you do something more manageable? Why don't you try and not use the F-bomb while you're in church? So I probably shouldn't be the one to criticize Trump, but I didn't for that reason, but I didn't think it was appropriate, especially in this context. Andy, you pointed out, yeah, all presidents use salty language. Every president I ever covered did. But they don't do it in public. And in this case, he used it in a very delicate diplomatic setting, which, it was just, I just didn't think it was appropriate. Did it convey frustration? Yeah, but frustration at what? Israel's Israel knows what it's doing. It's trying to protect itself from Iran, which is armed, launched a 7-front war against Israel, 7 fronts. And now they say, yeah, we'll abide by the ceasefire if the Israelis abide by the ceasefire. And this, great. So that doesn't necessarily mean this is over.
I don't think anyone's saying it's over.
Are the Houthis going to, well.
But I think
I'm responding to what Trump said and what Tom said about what Trump said. He has no right. He has no business being frustrated with Israel. Israel's defending
You don't know
itself.
that. You don't know what he knows, Carl. I mean, you don't know if things happen exactly as the president said, and there's no reason to suggest that it didn't happen that way. That he announced a ceasefire and they turn around and like drop it.
He announces a ceasefire. Well, he's the emperor. He's the god of the world. What are you talking about, Tom? These things have to be negotiated very carefully. If Israel agreed in principle for a ceasefire and there was a deadline and they wanted to take out, meanwhile, Iran's firing missiles at cities and killing Israeli civilians, and they want to take out those last 2 ballistic missile launchers, I don't think that's not violating maybe the spirit of the ceasefire, but not the order of it. And I don't think it's helpful for Trump to, play good cop and bad cop at the same time and to treat these 2 regimes like there's any equivalence between them. And we shouldn't either. And Andy, if we're going to talk about how great it is that there's a ceasefire in the Middle East, it's great if World War III is avoided. Boy, I'll give you that one. But if the United States is going to be really delighted because Trump can win the Nobel Prize or build a hotel in Tehran, and for another 49 years, 45 million Iranian women are basically consigned to a life one step above chattel slavery, I don't know that that's something we ought to be rejoicing.
Well, I tell you, if Trump gets to build a hotel in Tehran and it stands there, I will take that as a win, because whether it's Trump or anyone else, that would be a plus. I think, Carl.
So you're upset he's not going to push for regime change, Carl?
Yeah,
that's it.
Geez.
I think the Iranian people deserve to live in freedom. Yeah, I do.
So do I.
I'm not going to apologize for that.
Okay, but what does that mean? How do we make that happen, Carl?
Well, I don't know how we make it happen. And we've learned in Iraq and Afghanistan, these things are very difficult, but
correct.
If not nigh impossible.
Correct.
But we shouldn't be celebrating. But he went further than that, Tom.
I don't think he was celebrating, Carl. I think he
himself said he wants to, he'd be happy with the status quo. I'm not happy with the status quo.
Well, okay.
And I don't think Iranian women are happy with the status quo. And I don't think the millions of Iranians would like to have a free press and free speech and enjoy the rights that all 3 of us enjoy.
Right.
I don't think
this is where so let's just be clear. There are 2 options here. One is to like a decapitation strike, right? We know where Trump's already said, we know where the supreme leader is staying, and I'm sure we could take him out if we wanted to, right? Just with a bomb. And then that unleashes God knows what. And we don't know who would replace it. We don't know how the populace would react. Could be better, could be worse, who knows? The other thing is to go in and do what we did in Iraq, which is to occupy the country and try and force the country into some sort of democracy or something where they're going to, dip their fingers in the paint and all that. We've been through that. It does not end well, Carl. So I don't know, unless you're advocating the first path, which is just drop bombs, take out all their leaders, and then just be like, good luck, guys. Training wheels are off. Find your way to a new regime. Could be better, could be worse. Who knows? Is that what you're advocating?
I no, but that's the only 2 choices, as you see. We accept the legitimacy of this regime, or we invade it like we did Iraq. I can think of a lot between those 2 in American foreign policy, which, by the way, most presidents have been doing. Not Barack Obama, but
like what? What are we talking about?
Well, start with not having the president of the United States drop the F-bomb on Israel. Let's just start there. Let's think small.
That doesn't have the Donald Trump dropping the F-bomb has nothing to do with the situation of Iranian women and Iranian human rights and that regime and that populace, Carl. It makes no difference whether he says the F-bomb 100 times or he says it 0 times.
I think you have this phrase that was taught to me yesterday, Tom. I think you have neocon derangement syndrome.
I do not. I just want to know if we're saying that we need to help the Iranian people get to a better regime where they have more rights and all that. How do we do that? Like actually do that without sending our troops into harm's way and occupying that country and doing what we did in Iraq. We can bomb them and take out the leaders, like I said, but beyond that, it's like, what are we proposing? I don't understand what you want to happen here.
All I want is for the president to have some ambiguity and subtlety in his foreign policy. You're the one. He basically said he's comfortable. He wants the status quo, and that's what I don't think. I think he went too far.
Carl, he said on any given day he says 5 different things. You can't really say that this is sort of. I mean, you can put it this way. You can say that's the problem. That I understand, but I don't think you can say that. Oh my gosh, as of this morning, he's settled on this path and we're on this path forever. Who knows what will happen next? I think one of his great strengths has been his strategic ambiguity, and I think that continues. Anyway, we're going to have to take a break, guys.
I got one more thing to say.
Wait, Andy, go on to the last word, Tom. You should give it to him once in a while.
No, but even if you accept this, the status quo today is better than the status quo a week ago before we bombed them and took them further away from getting a nuclear weapon.
All right.
We're
going to give Tom the last word in this segment,
right.
But we will be back in just a moment, folks. So don't go away. This is Real Clear Politics. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and the feisty Carl Cannon today. So we'll be back right after these words. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. And Tom, as we were saying in the first block, the president is in Netherlands right now, the Netherlands, where NATO members have pledged to increase their military funding to 5% of GDP, up from 2% of GDP earlier. Another victory for the president. I don't know what Carl thinks, but what do you think?
Except for the Spanish.
Yeah, well,
they're not doing it.
I think Spain went along, but anyway.
Oh, did they go along? Okay,
Yeah.
good, because I thought Carl would want to invade them and make sure that we want to put boots on the ground in Spain to make sure they pay their fair share.
We tried that in the 1930s.
There's a little fudging with the numbers, whether it's really because it's 5% and a
3.5
of that
and then
is
a
for
1.5
blah, blah,
for,
blah,
yeah,
but,
I know,
okay,
for the
but still,
roads and
it's
bridges
moving in
and
the right
stuff.
direction, at least from some point of view.
Listen, this is the thing that this has been one of Donald Trump's sort of hobby horses that he's been on from his very beginning. And I think rightfully so, he has moved the needle. And part of that has been the Ukraine war and the fact that the Europeans had not been paying their fair share. It's a phrase that the Democrats love to use.
Only about millionaires and billionaires.
When it comes to Europe's security. And we've been footing the bill for NATO and the UN and all this other stuff. And I think Trump sort of rightfully pointed out that, hey, these are also wealthy countries and they can do more. And they have, based on his nudging, and his nudging alone, by the way, he's brought people around, not only in the United States to that opinion, but also around the globe. And we're seeing that happen now. And I think that's a good thing. It's a good thing for the organization itself to be a little bit more self-sufficient, independent from just basically the United States, although we're still going to be obviously the dominant player. But so it's good to see that people are finally coming around to that. And I think it's good for as I said, good for the organization itself.
Carl, victory for President Trump, and he's not the only president who's every president wants NATO to spend more. He's the only one who got it done, though.
Yeah, he's the only one though who threatened NATO countries if they were in arrears that he wouldn't lift a finger if Russia invaded them. He's the only president who went that far. So
maybe that's what it took.
Well, I'd be more willing to give him credit if he seemed to even understand how NATO works. He said as recently as today, they didn't pay their dues. They were arrears in their dues. NATO was broke when I got there. That's not what the agreement holds. There's not some giant fund. He understands. He confuses this the same way he does tariffs. He doesn't even know how the system operates. These countries are supposed to spend a percentage of their gross national product on defense, and they haven't been doing it.
Right.
That's true. That's not how Trump ever explains it. So one wonders if he has a sense, though, and his gut feeling was right. Europe was shirking its duty. But the ones who are shirking their duties the most are the Canadians. They're below 2%. Like I think it's 1.9% of their GDP.
That's why we got to invade them too, Carl. Boots on the ground.
That's me. And the reason that Canada hasn't stepped up the way these other is the reason there's two reasons. One is the reason Tom said. The Canadians aren't as threatened by Putin because of the Ukraine war. And so they haven't responded with the alacrity that Western Europe has. And the other reason is, anything Trump tells them to do, they're not inclined to do now. But whether they can afford it, Tom, is a more interesting, and Andy, is a more interesting question, because
the Europeans.
Their economies are basket cases right now. They have low productivity. They're going into debt. They don't have the dynamic, startup, the engine for startup companies.
Point and a half of this 5%.
Yeah,
this point and a half of this 5% is to go to sort of infrastructure or defense industry, I guess.
Right.
But Carl, I got to ask you another question about this, because when you say he doesn't understand NATO, there is this thing called Article 5, which is sort of all for one for all. It's not a hard concept to understand. It's basically the whole reason
the Musketeers
treaty exists. And Trump told reporters on Air Force One as he was flying over there, whether he was asked whether he was committed to Article 5, and he said, depends on your definition. There are numerous definitions of Article 5. You know that, right? But I'm committed to being their friends. I'm committed to saving lives. I'm committed to life and safety, and I'm going to give you an exact definition when I get there. I just want to do it on the back of an airplane. What do you make of that?
He's like, the kid, he's a pretty good high school quarterback. He never studies, and he gets called on an essay question. He simply doesn't answer. He starts bullshitting. He's like, like in, Animal House. Like, what's his
Don't
name?
stop him. He's on a roll.
Yeah,
when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor.
Yeah. Well,
Mr. Blutowski, 0.00.
I was actually thinking the head of the fraternity, whose name I forgot.
Oh my God, this is the best show we've ever done.
He doesn't study. He doesn't do anything. He's stalling. He doesn't have any idea what Article 5 is. So he'll get off the plane and he'll ask, Rubio or something. Oh, it's when they're attacked. Oh, yeah. Fine. I didn't mean to. Yeah, I'll come. I'll get a better answer to that. So I'm not going to put too much stock in that. There are strains in NATO now, though, and NATO expanded. This whole Ukraine war. Putin has used the idea of Ukraine joining NATO as a pretext for invading. That isn't the reason he invaded, but it's one of the reasons he's been able to get Russian public opinion behind him. Turkey, meanwhile, which was always the sort of SAT question that didn't add up. Turkey now doesn't have a free press anymore, and it's got this sort of Islamicist leaning guy as their president. So there are strains in NATO, but and the question is if Russia invades a NATO country, is the United States going to respond?
Yeah,
that's an important question,
right.
And I imagine that the president's going to be asked to give a pretty direct answer to it.
How many countries were in NATO when it started? I think it was it 12?
Gosh.
I think. And now it's like 32 or something.
Yeah.
Well, France wouldn't join. Remember that. What sort of?
Well,
it's the definite in the dictionary.
Carl,
it says ingratitude.
You make an important point. Is the U.S. going to war if Estonia gets invaded or something? I mean, these are
well, that's the
important questions, because there are a lot of people who would say there's nothing in our national interest that suggests we need to go to war with Russia.
It's exactly what Neville Chamberlain said. Exactly word for what you just said.
All right, guys. Today's show is crazy, man. I want to talk though about something else domestically. I want to talk about Lisa Murkowski, Tom, who said she is considering or has considered the possibility of quitting the GOP. So this is Lisa Murkowski. She's the senator from Alaska, moderate. She's
the daughter of a former senator.
She's thinking of becoming an independent or considering becoming an independent and then caucusing with the Democrats. Now, I will say she's got a book coming out. So this may have something to do with that. Yeah. But she's certainly getting a lot of attention right now.
Yeah. I mean, if you said she's hardly a Republican to begin with, I mean, she's always in that caucus where, it's Murkowski and it's Susan Collins and it's a couple others who are always sort of hemming and hawing about whether they're getting on board. So, but look, I mean, She said, if the Senate, I think the quote is the way that or the headline that I saw on this was that, if it ends up being a 50-50 Senate, that she would switch and she would throw this to the Democrats, a la jumping Jim Jeffords back in what year was that, Carl? It's like 2002. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which, I mean, that would be a big deal. That would be I think that John Fetterman could probably, name his price. He could get the moon from the Republicans to flip things back, which, may happen, may not happen. But yeah, these kind of things, when government is that closely divided and the stakes get really, really high, and someone like Lisa Murkowski, again, who's sort of nominally a Republican now.
Well, she was beaten, remember, in the Republican primary in her state,
right.
and ran as
a write-in campaign,
and ran as an independent. She's basically been an independent, and what I'd like to see is more independence in the Senate. I think the Senate would work much better. Our friend Greg Orman, who's been on our show several times, written for us, and he wasn't the first who coined it, but he popularized it. Had the idea of a fulcrum strategy, what he talked about, and you'd have 4 or 5 independent-minded. They wouldn't all be literally independents. There'd be 2 or 3 independents in the Senate. Angus King is one. This guy. Then you'd have Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, and 3 or 4 other centrists, and that's all there are. But they would be the balance of power. They wouldn't caucus with anyone. As long as there's 1 or 2 of them, though, you're home alone. So I understand what Murkowski would do, but that's a different thing. She ran as an independent. She didn't run as a Democrat. And if she had run as a Democrat, she probably wouldn't have won in Alaska. So, Vermont changed in the time Jim Jeffords was there. Alaska hasn't really changed. And so I imagine there would be people in Alaska who wouldn't be that happy about it.
Well, we'll see if this sells books. I think that's my question about the whole thing.
I'm sure.
Anyway, you're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. Don't go away. We'll be back with more right after these words.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief of Real Clear Politics. You're listening to us on Sirius XM Radio, or maybe watching on our podcast. I'm joined now by Andy Walworth, still here, and we're joined by Bill King, who's our special correspondent in Texas. And if you go to our website regularly, you see Bill's pieces. He has an eclectic sense of interest. He's a Texas lawyer. He's a nonpartisan, independent like me. So I love having Bill on the show. Bill, your latest piece, it's a statistical piece, and we love statistics here at Real Clear Politics. And it's about the population estimates the United Nations puts out, and how I remember Paul, when I was a kid, Bill, you remember Paul Ehrlich scared the bejesus out of everyone in the Western world with his book, The Population Bomb. Every single word in it has been disproven. But these people are still out there. They're still saying that we have the birth rates are exploding and we have too many people. But the numbers, the UN has sort of quietly revised its numbers downward, hasn't it?
Yeah, so now a freshman in college, and I went out and joined Zero Population Group, which was a movement to promise you wouldn't have any more than 2 kids. I actually slipped up and had 1 extra. But
me too. So did Andy. All 3 of us have 3 children.
The funny thing about it is the Ehrlichs, really, he and his wife wrote that book together. They got the demographic math correctly. The population was and continued to explode after that fact. What he got wrong was that Herman Burlog came along and showed us how to grow a whole lot more food, and so we were able to feed all those extra people. But if you look at a curve of human population, it's a pretty flat line until about the 18th or 19th century. Then also just turned straight up in the 20th century like a rocket ship. And so if you look at the numbers at that time, what he concluded was not unreasonable. But something weird happened. About 1970, all of a sudden, human beings, especially women, decided to start having fewer children. And at that point in time, the average woman in the world was having 5 or 6 kids. And that went from 5 or 6 to today, it's about 2 in less than 75 years. Really got down to 2.5 in about 50 years. And so once you come off those really high birth rates, and all of a sudden, things start changing. And everybody keeps thinking, well, we've hit the bottom, and the birth rates just continue to slide downward. And they're going down all over the world. Now, in places like sub-Saharan Africa, they're still high, but they're a lot lower than they were 20 or 30 years ago. And so these numbers just keep coming down and keep coming down. And nobody knows exactly how low they're going to go. But in some places like China, for example, their birth rate's barely over 1. And at that rate, they will lose half their population by the end of this century. That's a dramatic event. We don't have any historical precedent for that a country losing that kind of population.
Well, what are some of the ramifications, social and economic, of less than zero population growth in some of these in the Western world and in Asia? What are we looking at? What does that mean?
I think I don't want to be an alarmist about this because look, we couldn't keep going the way we were going. We were going to burn the place up. We just had too many people. So there needed to be an adjustment. This adjustment is pretty abrupt, though, in terms of demographic era terms, and so it's going to cause some disruptions. We're not going to be putting as much pressure on the planet. That's a good thing, but we got to completely rethink how we take care of older people. So systems like Social Security don't work in this kind of environment. Social Security was based on there's always going to be more and more young people coming into the workforce to take care. Well, that's not the case. And so you see places like Japan and China already struggling with this. It has other things, for example, in the United States today, let me just put this caveat out there. A lot of it depends on what we do with immigration.
Yeah.
We have the great luxury in the United States that everybody in the world still wants to come here. So we actually have a little bit of a valve that we can turn on and off if we never figure out how to do immigration right. But nobody's trying to sneak into China or Russia, and so
maybe a stray North Korean now and then. But I take your point.
So we have the ability to regulate this a little bit better than most countries do, although we can't seem to figure out how to do it on a rational basis. But it's going to be tremendous pressure on workforces in countries like China, Japan. How do you take care of all these old people? We're not going to need as much of anything anymore. I've been talking about this recently, in all over the United States, especially in big urban areas, our schools are mostly, a lot of them are not enrolled nearly to the capacity they were built in previous decades. And the truth of the matter is, today, unless we open up the immigration gate again, the United States will never have more school-age children than it has right now. Never. And so we don't need to be building any more schools.
You're listening to Bill King, who's our resident demographer, at least this week. Bill's a Texas lawyer, a frequent contributor to Real Clear Politics, political independent. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief, RCP, joined now by Andrew Walworth. Andy, I wanted to get you in the conversation to see what questions you might have.
Well, I have a question. I obviously have an observation as well, which is that, we do have, as Bill mentions, we have the ability to have immigrants come into this country. We also have, people are living longer. So we have two trends actually that sort of fight against this lowering birth rate. But the birth rate decline seems to be swamping those two trends at this point. And Bill, my question really is, what can be done about that if you, like the Trump administration has taken this on as an issue and said that they would like to see people have more babies, baby bonds, tax incentives. But other governments have tried that as well without any success. I'm thinking of Japan. I'm thinking of South Korea. So what are the levers that the government can pull beyond immigration to sort of encourage people to have babies again?
Well, let me say two things about that. Number one, I'm not sure we should be trying to do anything about it. Mm-hmm. I'm not so much raising alarm as I'm just, calling to people's attention what's going on. We don't need a lot more people in the world. We got 8 billion. There's enough of us, Mm-hmm. So I don't see this as being some great catastrophe that we need to run out and address as a problem. But we do need to understand what's going on and begin altering our policies. For example, a policy of building a bunch of new schools in the United States right now would be a bad idea. Mm-hmm. So I think we need to incorporate that this is the new reality. Secondly, as you point out, nobody's figured out how to stop this. I mentioned in the article I wrote for you guys a book called Empty Planet by a couple of Canadian journalists. And they talk about the cultural reasons this is taking place and how powerful those cultural motivations are, especially for women. And it's women getting educated. It's the world getting less religious. I mean, most religions encourage a lot more kids. Catholic Church did, Islam certainly does. But those religions are losing sway with more and more people all the time. Um, the statistics show that once a woman gets about an eighth or a ninth grade education, then all of a sudden, she stops having fewer children, and normally pretty dramatic with you. Of course, I think you need to point out too that this thing tipped over in 1970, which is the same year that the pill became readily available.
Just a coincidence, I'm sure, Bill.
Yeah. So we had not only, we had the ability for women to suddenly control it a lot better than they'd ever had before.
Right.
And so, in the places where you see the birth rate still high, contraception's generally not very available. Women don't get very well educated; they're suppressed. But any place, you start educating women, they start deciding, hey, there's something I can do besides having babies. Then they cut way back on their family sizes.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting.
I don't think that's. By the way, I don't think it's a bad thing.
Right.
I'm just saying it's just a phenomenon that's going on, and I feel like this kind of like I do about climate change. I think I think climate change is real. I don't think there's anything we can do about it. We're not going to suddenly stop burning a bunch of hydrocarbons, and so I think we just need to start modifying our policies to accommodate the fact that, and like I say, the United States has the great luxury that we have the ability to regulate this, and almost no other country in the world has that ability. Canada does to some extent. They've done a better job on their immigration policy than we've done. But we're going to quickly figure out that we can't run this economy without the 10 or 15 or 20 million, whatever number you want to say, of immigrants that we have here.
Bill, I want to ask you about something you mentioned earlier, and we talked on this show a week or two ago with Greg Orman, who was talking about it in a different context. Greg, he's a friend, mutual friend.
Yeah, I love Greg.
Is it there are public policy challenges that come up when you talk about robotics. I was in Santa Barbara at a nursing home a couple weeks ago, and I saw literally a robot like scooting, like R2D2 scooting down the hallway of a nursing home with a tray and the room number, and it knew where to go to deliver the food. And I thought, all right, that's kind of cute. And, everybody else was person was delivering the trays. But you talked about, we're going to have so many, these baby boomers are going to live, live forever, be 100. There's not going to be, you're going to need a change in the way elder people are cared for, and there's just not enough bodies to do it. And I was wondering if you thought that robotics was going to play a role in elder care.
I'm actually on the board of a faith-based retirement community nonprofit. We run about a dozen senior care facilities in Texas. It's going to be a real challenge, and you're seeing this especially in Japan. There's some interesting stories have been coming out of Japan about some of the accommodations that they're making, and robotics is part of it. And also sensing in the room. So, the room has sensors in it that sense breathing and temperature and all that without having all the wires hooked up to you and everything. So there's a lot of things going on there. I will say this. I want to correct one thing.
Well, we got about 20 seconds left, so make it quick.
People are not living that much longer right now.
Okay.
The life expectancy in the United States has topped out about 10 years ago, and it's basically been stuck at about 78 or something at birth right now. We're really not doing much to improve that lately.
Well, I will say this, Carl, before we leave, which is just two great philosophies. Herb Stein, the economist, said a trend that can't continue won't. So we'll see what happens there. And Yogi Berra, who William King quotes in his article, it's awfully hard to make predictions about the future. I think that was the quote, right? So, Carl?
Predictions are hard, especially about the future.
Exactly.
That's right. All right. Well, that's going to do it for us. You've been listening to Bill King, our man in Texas, frequent contributor to RealClearPolitics, lawyer and political independent. And I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief, and I've been with Andy Walworth. Don't go away. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. And for our next segment, we've invited Charlie Stone, a a contributor at RCP, to share his latest interview that he conducted for the RCP video series, The Unknowns. Charlie's guest is actor Kirk Cameron, author of Born to be Brave, How to be Part of America's Spiritual Comeback. And now, here's Charlie Stone in conversation with Kirk Cameron.
My name is Charlie Stone, and today we have Mike Seaver. No, we don't. We have Kirk Cameron. It was really confusing because when he signed on, it said Mike Seaver. Ladies and gentlemen, Kirk Cameron, actor, author, 80s icon, Mike Seaver from Growing Pains. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Charlie, I have learned to answer to both Kirk and Mike. I love, if I'm in New York City, the sanitation driver, he's, "Hey, Mikey, how's it going? How's Eddie and Boner? How's Ben and Carol?" So I answer to either.
So let's get into your journey, because from what I understand, you were a self-described atheist. So before we go to your, becoming a born-again Christian, what was your mind wrapped up with when you were an atheist or a self-described atheist?
Essentially synonymous with the mind of Mike Seaver. I'm just a hormone with feet at 14 years old, sneaking out of the house, trying to get a date with the cutest girl at the high school, trying not to get in trouble, trying to pass my grades, and sneak back in without my parents waking up. That character was essentially me, 14, 15, 16, 17 years old. And I was trying to just adjust to my new normal. I went from a kid with 3 little sisters. My dad's a math and physical education coach at a junior high school. My mom's teaching macrame classes in the garage. And I'm on TV and people are starting to ask me for my autograph. And I'm thinking, what's going on? This is really weird. I never even wanted to be an actor. I wanted to be a doctor. I thought I'd go to medical school and become a surgeon. That was my jam. It was science and biology and human anatomy. And my mom took me down to see this agent, and all of a sudden I did a Fruit Loops commercial. And then it was McDonald's and 409. Then it was a TV series, and then Growing Pains. And so I was trying to really just keep from like tripping over my own feet when I was 14, 15, 16 years old.
Was there a seminal moment, like Moses had the burning bush, or what did it start to sort of evolve over time where your thinking changed and sort of guided you to become a born-again Christian?
Well, I suppose it did, in that I was thinking of philosophical questions, as a lot of teenage kids do, right? I mean, a lot of cultural change happens with young people. Kids in junior high school asking big questions. The Beatles, everybody wants to change the world. Everybody wants a revolution. On the college campuses, these things are just breeding grounds for that. And I think it's because our hormones are going, the questions are making sense, our frontal lobe is being completed in its development. And around that time, I was asking big questions. What happens when you die? Is there anything out there when we step out of here? And I just sort of made fun of the concept of an imaginary being up in the clouds somewhere, tucked behind a rainbow, who was watching the good and the bad. And then the craziest thing happened. I'm in the middle of Growing Pains. I'm not sick. I'm not broke. I'm not lonely. I'm none of those things that often cause people to turn to God. But I met a really cute girl and I wanted to go on a date. She said, "Okay, meet me at church." I thought, I'm not a Christian. But then I remembered I am an actor. I could fake this whole thing. Plenty of religious people do. And so I went to church and I heard a message that captivated me, both my intellect and my conscience, my heart. And I began asking lots of questions. It led to me sitting in the driver's seat of my sports car at 17 years old, parked on the side of the road. And I thought, if today's the day that I get hit by a drunk driver and get catapulted to the gates of heaven, I'm not getting in, because I don't even believe in God. And if he gives me the air I breathe, and he made the stars and keeps my heart beating at night while I'm asleep, and I've never said thank you, what kind of an idiot and a fool am I? And so I thought, Einstein believed in God. People far more brilliant than I have believed in intelligent design and the God of the Bible. So I prayed and said, God, would you show me who you are if you're there? And would you make me the man you created me to be? That was the very beginning of me opening my mind and my heart to something I didn't understand. But the last thing I wanted was to become some religious fruitcake with a sandwich board and a bullhorn telling people, what to do or you're going to hell. So it was a slow process from there of me asking questions and studying archaeology and history and prophecy and psychology and all the disciplines that brought me to a place where I was persuaded that my trust in the Bible and my trust in Christ was well placed.
I'd be remiss if I didn't bring in some politics, because you've been active in politics and you've been supportive of Donald Trump. There is a discussion by some indicating that are Christians who support Trump, is Trump sort of that false prophet that is talked about in the Bible? Because you and I can disagree about things, but mostly when you talk about humility and love and kindness, those are not the top three things one thinks about, at least how someone perceived Donald Trump from acting. So how do you reconcile that? How do you look at the messenger who may have the right message, but may not be the character that you would ultimately want?
Great question. So with regard to Antichrist, man of lawlessness, you're using some biblical phrases that are found in the New Testament. I don't think any of that is true at all. I think that's referring to actually first century bad guys during the lifetime of guys like John and Paul and others. So no. And it's funny because that's always a great religious tactic to go after somebody. And in fact, they said that about Barack Obama as well. And that's been a label that they've given to Ronald Reagan. You know why? Because he has the number 666 you could attach to him with 6 letters in Ronald, 6 letters in Wilson, 6 letters in Reagan. And therefore he must be the Antichrist. So I think all of that is silly ridiculousness. With regard to him, what did you ask me? How do I reconcile what?
Well, you have
humility and love
and kindness, right? He may exemplify that with his family, but he certainly doesn't exemplify that with the people he disagrees with. He's very aggressive. Some would say vindictive. Some would say using justice to go after people he disagrees with. It feels like Christ would be like, you could do better here, pal.
Yeah. Well, if that's how someone feels about our political representative in the executive branch, whether it's Biden or whether it's Trump or whether it's Obama or whether it's Reagan, if you don't like the guy that's in there, the first thing I think that we all need to do is say, wait a minute, how did this happen? And did we have a better alternative? And why didn't we put that person into the office? If our election systems are actually functional and they're not being tampered with, which God forbid that would actually happen in the United States of America. I mean, that's just terrifying and frightening. I mean, that's the end of the republic. If we get this, system that we can't even trust people, right? So anyway, that's another whole subject. But I've often wondered, why is it that we have to choose between Donald Trump with his flaws and strengths, and then Hillary Clinton and her flaws and her strengths, or Kamala Harris and her flaws and her strengths? Can we do better than this? Surely, of all the people in the United States, we were not able to first of all, raise 100 individuals out of 300 million people who could stand there up on that stage and go, oh my goodness, I'd be good with any one of these. Let's just pick the top 10. Let's just have 5. I'm good with any of these 5. Surely we could do that with CEOs of our companies and other positions. I could pick 5 pastors. I'd sit under those guys' leadership any day. Can we not do that with a president? And but I go, where are they? I mean, the system is so difficult that we are essentially left with 2, and now everyone's feeling like they're choosing between the best of two evils. And so part of my answer is our fault. He's got the balls to step up and actually want to do the things that he's doing that many people are very, very happy with. They may not like the way that he's doing or the way he tweets, but my goodness, I'd rather have somebody doing the right things that are helping families and keeping America safe and secure and returning back to ideas that comport more with the Constitution and the original American value system than people who have really, really great speech and oratory skills and kindness and politeness in their form, but underneath are undermining the very values that will lead to our blessing and our protection. So I can't have exactly what it is that I want, but at the end of the day, I trust that whoever the Lord puts in these positions of leadership, he's going to work with that to bring about the good for those who love him. And I would say this if Kamala Harris was put into the office as well, because my trust ultimately is not in a political figure. It's not in anything other than God's ability to run his world well. And he somehow mysteriously has been able to do that in my life personally. And he's doing it in the lives of all those who love him. That's my worldview. That's how I frame all of this stuff.
All right. Well, thank you again, Mike Seaver and Kirk Cameron. I appreciate your time, and I hopefully you will come back and talk to us again.
I would love that. Thanks so much, Charlie. Great to talk to you.
You've been listening to RCP contributor Charlie Stone in conversation with actor and author Kirk Cameron. You can hear and see the full exchange as well as more of Charlie's interview series on RealClearPolitics.com. And that will do it for today's program. I'm Andrew Walworth, and on behalf of Carl, Tom, Charlie, and all of us here at RCP, thanks for listening. We'll be back here tomorrow. Have a great evening.